Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. Today, we welcome Matt Erickson, who's VP of Solutions for today's sponsor, SpiderOak Mission Systems. Matt is going to guide us in a discussion of the challenges involved with protecting digital communications and collaboration across both local and remote systems for the federal and the private sector space. We'll start with a discussion of the challenges facing both the public and private sectors. We'll discuss how emerging technologies and methodologies address these problems, and we'll learn about what SpiderOak is doing to help address these issues as well. All this and more as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Some things are best kept secret. You wouldn't send your company's financial data through the mail on a postcard. Then why would you let your employees use insecure collaboration and file share tools to share sensitive business information? Introducing Crossclave, a file sharing and collaboration solution built secure from the ground up. Think Signal, only designed specifically for business and enterprise users. Crossclave uses blockchain technology and end-to-end encryption to deliver a true zero-trust system designed to protect you and your business's most valuable data. So if you need to share sensitive information, SpiderOak's Crossclave is your only choice. Go to securityweekly.com/SpiderOak and get a free account with 5 gigabytes of storage.
Welcome to episode 82 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on August 10th, 2021. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and I am joined remotely today by the singular Mr. Josh Marpet. Josh, welcome.
Why, thank you. Pleasure to be here as always.
It's just us today, and this is a landmark day because Mr. Scott Lyons, this is the first time he's ever missed an episode, so he's broken his streak. But he's on an airplane flying back from Las Vegas after gooning at DEF CON this past week.
Okay.
I will miss him. And I, too, was in Vegas last week. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit during the course of today's show.
I think that's a great idea.
We have a few announcements before we jump into it. Here's some exciting news. SC Media, which is also a part of the Cyber Risk Alliance, has debuted its all-new SC digital experience, which is fully integrated with the Security Weekly podcast content and more. The new site increases the scope and scale of original content resources from the editorial staff, from contributors. I can't talk. From contributors and the far-reaching Cyber Risk Alliance network. If you want to check it out, visit www.scmagazine.com. Take a new look, and if you dig far enough under the podcast category, you'll see our show. It's kind of cool. Also, Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our first round of speakers, who will include such notable luminaries as David Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out our speaker lineup. Okay, enough of that. Let us jump into our discussion today. As mentioned in the opening segment, we are joined today by Mr. Matt Erickson. He is VP of Solutions at SpiderOak. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
And great to see another balded, bearded man on the show today, right, Josh?
You know, it's really the best when the hair migrates from here to here.
It is. I'll never understand as a fellow bald person why so much hair grows on other parts of your body everywhere but the top of your head. But perhaps that's another issue for another day.
Yeah. My daughter just says that I'm a warm, fuzzy blanket. Life is good, you know? I mean, come on.
There you go. There you go. It's not to be overrated, I guess. So Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into cybersecurity, and ultimately how you ended up where you are today at SpiderOak.
Well, I've been at SpiderOak for over 10 years now. So kind of a short story leading up to I've just been here forever. I got started in climate science, actually, at U of I Champaign. Did some research programming there, and wound up being a customer of SpiderOak's before I started working here. Combination of my housemate was working at SpiderOak, and also I was working with sensitive information as relates to climate science. There's a lot of sensitive data that's used to process to run climate models against. And so I was using SpiderOak to back that up. And eventually I wound up being SpiderOak's first mobile developer, wound up running through engineering roles, VP engineering, moved over, now VP solutions. So most of my career has actually just been SpiderOak. So slightly boring story about how I wound up here, but
well, it's slightly boring, but it's also slightly intriguing because those of us that have been in the industry a long time have often made several career moves, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So it's relatively rare to meet somebody that has a long tenure at one company. I mean, you've basically spent your entire career at one company. So
yeah,
that begs the question. Tell us a little bit about what SpiderOak is all about and what makes it such a great company to still be a part of after all these years.
Yeah. So SpiderOak, I guess, is the OG Zero Trust company. When we got started, the founders didn't want to deal with having the responsibility of the plaintext data from users on their systems, and we just kept going from there. So our original solution, which is now what we call One Backup, got started with really interesting key management. Because those of us who grew up with crypto solutions.
No. Let's be honest. It was lazy key management. It was you handle your own keys because we don't feel like doing it. Okay, come on. Just here's your key. Go away. Handle your own key.
I mean, one man's lazy,
really
another man's easy.
Key management.
Well, okay. So, if you want to talk about key management at the time, looking around, what else would you have to encrypt anything with before sending it off to the cloud? Which the cloud keyword for somebody else's computer. And so what are you going to do? PGP and keep that somewhere? I mean, the PGP key servers is almost this littered history of people forgetting their previous passphrase and moving on to the next one.
Hey, I resemble that remark, okay? I must have 17 identities on the MIT key server, Let's be honest.
Right? And
so
then
what you're saying is I should give up on all those floppy disks I have because I'm never going to remember the passphrase, and I might as well throw it.
And the one with 30,000 bitcoins, yeah, you're never getting that back. Sorry.
No, that's Tyler.
No, that's just gone. Yeah, so I mean, SpiderOak boiled it down to a username and password, and the password was actually stretched to be your key. So as long as you could remember your password, or have a device that is online. If you've forgotten your password, you could just change it from that app. And that's how we got started. And we wound up in the enterprise space with that, wound up serving a bunch of, variety of customers. And so a few years ago, we started looking around thinking okay, well, backup's cool and all, but what else is there? And we started work on what is now Crossplay and the platform that powers it underneath it. But how can we do this collaboratively? How can we, because SpiderOak One Backup isn't really designed to work well with multiple people. It's just backing up your stuff. And maybe your corporate administrator can work with you on that and peek in. But really, it's just your stuff goes to the cloud and it's safe there. Whereas, it's a very collaborative world today. We have a variety of actually really great solutions to work together. And all of them are kind of terrifying to extremely terrifying if you're thinking about putting actually sensitive information on there. So we started work on the system that's now grown to Crossclave and the SpiderOak platform underneath. So that's our shtick.
Okay, before we get too far into the weeds, and talking crypto and encryption is always a fun topic for me. We are, of course, Security and Compliance Weekly, and we start each of our interviews with what we call the hot seat question. And the question is simply this. And this is not a right or wrong response that we're looking for. We're just trying to get a little bit of a sense of your perspective on this whole thing that we like to call the security versus compliance continuum. So where do you fall in this thing called security versus compliance?
I definitely understand the difference. There's a lot of compliance that's based off of making sure you've ticked boxes just enough to get somebody who actually doesn't know security happy with you. But I think done well, a good compliance regime, hypothetically speaking, administered by people who get security, can really help a lot of organizations with a much better security posture online. So,
admit it, sir, you went to law school.
I did some privacy lobbying for a while, so hard question.
We come to the root of the matter. You, sir, are a lobbyist.
Oh no! But I mean, privacy falls into that as well. Like that's
no, it does. It does. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's a three-way Venn diagram, and ideally, you'll find the spot right in the middle.
Right.
So I'd really, if you don't mind, let's take a couple of seconds and talk about that, because you're the first one that I can recall that said, there's security, compliance, and by the way, it's privacy. It's a three-way, not just a two-way spectrum. And I really like that. That's fascinating. And do you think that privacy should and can be segregated out from the security and compliance as privacy is separate from?
Yeah, it's a separate topic. Like, look at Google's business model. I have nothing but praise for Google's security efforts.
Right.
And, you can set up your G Suite to have all the tick boxes that you need for a variety of regulated industries. Right. But their privacy, their business is built off of having weak privacy from Google. I know that Google Apps are supposed to not be scanned by Google for their advertising purposes. But if you're thinking about like just a small solo practitioner who might just have a personal Gmail account, their data is not by definition private in exchange for this free service. Another thing to look at is, I'm just going to say this and then drop it and not touch it with a 10-foot pole. But the recent stuff going on around Apple and their content scanning that they're talking about. Again, it's a compliance thing, and they're trying to fit security and privacy around that as well. It's a very active and energetic topic, like how you get that Venn diagram. Ideally, you want to be in the center, right? And compliance is a tool, in theory, where you can have some common yardstick to measure both privacy and security from. And I understand that in a lot of giant organizations or the government, you wind up with compliance being its own end goal outside of the purposes why you're going through a regulatory process to begin with. But
I see the pain. I see the furrows in your brow, sir. You've done this. Okay.
Oh, man.
But I want to, Jeff, hang on 1 second. I just want to finish off that one little thought there. So first off, in terms of the Apple photo scanning, two things. One is, but I mean, think of the children, you horrible person. I'm joking, relax. That's how everything starts, with think of the children. And then it just goes, well, if we just look for pictures of drugs, hey, we'll find some and then we can arrest them and make money. Amazing. Don't get me started. But if you just turn off your iCloud photos and use, for example, your Amazon Prime, which gives you free photos in full resolution, any amount of photos you want, hey, I mean, I'm just saying. Anyway, Amazon's
going to be scanning anyway.
Hey,
donuts.
It's going to be scanned. Just get used to it, man. It's just going to be scanned. Don't you understand? That's the price of progress. And then I bring out the joke where, do you know the difference between a tech enthusiast and an actual technologist?
No.
What
a tech enthusiast A tech enthusiast has smart home everything. They've got a Google Assistant over there, an Alexa glued to their ceiling, like an Apple Home, whatever the thing is, wherever. Their house answers to them. Their walls, open up and have like TV screens glued everywhere, like tiles, and then like the whole house answers to them. And a technologist has a printer with a baseball bat next to it in case it starts talking.
You're not wrong. There's a former cyber intelligence professional that I know, and he's retired, living the life. He has an Alexa in his home, and it's purposely left unplugged unless he's cooking.
Yeah, no, for timers more than anything else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And they just don't talk about anything while they're cooking, anything important, and that's it.
Yeah, I have not a single Alexa, Google Home, or anything in the house other than the Roku. And we have the one that doesn't, I believe, have Alexa enabled on it, which makes me very happy. It's getting harder to find those. So anyway, I apologize, Jeff. I interrupted you before. Please go ahead.
No, that's fine. I wanted to harken back to a statement you said early on, Matt, about back in the day. And what were the options for encryption? And I sort of chuckled because I as I am wont to do, I'm going to bring up PCI, and PCI has been out the data security standards since 2004, and there has always been a requirement to encrypt data at rest, specifically credit card data. And yet, in those early days, and probably the first 5 or 6 years, there were effectively no options for encrypting any of that data. A lot of the data was sitting in databases, and none of the database providers back in those days had an encryption option, or if they did, it was very expensive and hard to implement. So, I don't know how much your company grew up around compliance or specifically PCI, but what makes a company, I guess, decide to there's a market here, there's a gap here where we should provide encryption solutions, unless all of the people that started the company came out of the DoD, which for all I know they did. What makes a commercial company decide to get into this kind of thing?
So first off, our founders were probably the most opposite of DoD people you can imagine. In fact, one of our original tech co-founders is now working with Zcash pretty closely. So, what makes people want to do this? I mean, people want the Star Trek future, right?
Right.
But so the Enterprise has terrible cybersecurity because the computer gets hacked and the ship gets taken over every other week, right? But
it's got replicators, tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Yeah, and out comes like Slimer and attacks the room. But really, people have it's such a fearless embrace of technology that you get out of Star Trek that is really cool, and technologists want to go to your earlier comment about smart home gear. You want to just ask the house to get you some tea, and it appears on your desk. Wouldn't that be amazing? But to do that fearlessly, you really need to have those assurances of security and privacy. And that's really what got us going originally, to be able to make use of cloud computing. And this is 2006, 2007. Dropbox itself didn't exist until 2009. The iPhone was announced in 2006, released in 2007, maybe off by a year or two here. But this is when a smartphone meant a BlackBerry or a Nokia. Yep. Remember those things? They were great. And like cloud services. Yeah,
because they worked like a communicator. You had to flip it open to talk.
Exactly. Oh, I used to have one of those. It was pretty baller. Could run Python on it. But that was smartphones, and if you were lucky, you had 3 megabit DSL. Woo. So that's when SpiderOak really got rolling with this. In terms of being able to, this is a brave new world out there. How can we actually use it safely? And you make full use of it because you're not worried about who's looking over your shoulder. And that's what really drove SpiderOak, not some DoD use case. It turns out that the DoD themselves wear tinfoil hats, so they're a pretty natural fit for us in terms of marketing and sales. But it's not some DoD use case. Yeah, I mean,
because that's why I have no hair, because of my past tinfoil hat wearing days.
Oh, you haven't heard about the metal foil issue with? Never mind. Anyway, so I got to say, I remember when SpiderOak was one of the only choices, and the fact that I could encrypt it locally with my key and then upload the encrypted blob, and SpiderOak had no knowledge, full zero knowledge, zero trust of what I was uploading, was amazing, because it meant that I could actually guarantee who had access.
Yeah.
And I remember consulting to companies who were like, well, how do we guarantee that? Because they had contracts even back then, 2008, 2009, 2010, depending. How can we guarantee that our third-party provider, our backup provider, a lot of people were using SpiderOak for backups, they do not have access. I'm like, well, encrypt it locally. They're like, well, does that mean they don't have access? I'm like, if you don't give them the key, they can't decrypt it. Like, how sure are you of that? I'm pretty sure on that.
Yeah.
They're like, well, like, when could they decrypt it? I'm like, 4, maybe 6. Like, yeah. I'm like, million years from now. And they went, oh, we don't care about that. I'm like, right. So SpiderOak was actually pretty popular. I used it I recommend it to my clients a lot back 10, 15 years ago. But, I'll be honest with you, and I'm going, not after your company, but I'm talking about it. Like, I haven't heard much about SpiderOak recently. I just, no offense, I just haven't. Talk to me. Why is SpiderOak, what are you doing now?
So SpiderOak, after looking at the backup market, which is very margin driven, like talk to anybody who does online backups, and some of our competition, you can see how they're clearly using tape just to keep those margins down, because at some point, spinning platters of rust can only get so cheap.
I have a friend that calls it spinning rust. Yes.
So, it can only get so cheap before you're just talking about the cost of iron dust on metal platters. And so we started looking at the collaboration market, and so we've been in a bit of a pivot reboot with moving to collaboration tools, first Semaphore and now Crossclave, which includes chat, file share, eventually video conferencing. And we've also been getting into space, actually, because satellites are, I know this is security and compliance and not spaceships and Captain Picard Weekly, but bald heads. But
we can boldly go where no one has gone before on this podcast.
But space is, coming back to a lot of traditional infrastructure. Space is still important. We're using imaging capabilities that 10 years ago were military only, and now you can just go to Planet or Maxar and just start downloading imagery for both your own products or like hedge funds counting cars in parking lots. You might be deploying new infrastructure to help bolster up like power or telecom or health, and have to hit communication satellites. And up until recently, the security model for satellites was, well, nobody else can talk to it.
I was at H.D. Moore's talk about hacking Mars using VxWorks, and I was like, oh my God, you can get at Mars using a damn near obsolete, real-time operating system? And he was like, uh-huh.
Oh gosh, you can, today, roughly about $100 in parts. The Air Force calls it the Nyan Sat, after, Nyan Cat, that Pop-Tart rainbow cat thing. $100 a part, so the Raspberry Pi and some actuators. You can basically talk to any satellite in low Earth orbit now, which is basically most of them. Like, all the really interesting stuff is still in low Earth orbit. Now
the Starlink is in low Earth orbit, isn't it?
Starlink, Planet, a bunch of government stuff. There's a term coming out of Air Force research called the hybrid space architecture, which is how can the government actually make use of commercial space for national requirements. So it's a kind of a wild west currently, because either you have your own bespoke security that can't talk to anything else, but on the same side you have Amazon Ground Station, Azure Orbital, Azure Space, and putting the cloud in the cloud. How do you secure that? And that's where SpiderOak comes in. That's we've been doing a lot of work on that, combined with our collaboration product. And so it's taken a while. Encryption tools, definitely. That's a very long story of why you haven't heard that much from us up until recently. Again, is encryption-based tools take a lot of time up front to get right, because unlike a traditional sort of tool where the provider knows everything about it, we need to make sure the data is structured properly out the get-go, because we're not going to be able to change it afterwards. We can't see the data. We can't modify the data. So if we get it wrong, we're stuck with that design forever.
I mean, 4 to 6 million years. It's not actually forever, but it's close.
All we need to do is just pull down all the power in Utah, and we'll be fine.
Oh dear.
So, that's where we've been. Collaboration tools and, oddly enough, space, which personally I don't mind. SpiderOak's going to the moon.
Super cool. Yeah, that's super cool. Let's be honest. I mean, that is just.
Coincidentally, did the decision to shift towards collaboration happen in, say, the last 12 to 18 months?
We actually started with Semaphore back in 2015. There was a round of, we got some investment. There was a change of some management, but then kind of some combination of things happening, corporate hijinks, and we're doubled down on this pivot starting around 2017, 2018. But it's just taken a while to get the tool out there. So yeah, that's why you don't really kind of this. We went quiet for a bit in the mid-teens, basically.
Okay, gotcha. No, that makes sense. I was honestly curious. So you've done collaboration tools. You've put encrypted communication and encrypted collaboration and encryption security systems into space systems and space companies, I guess, and their hardware and software. That's fascinating. I've got to ask. I mean, are you still doing just sort of your basic encrypted communication, encrypted backup, encrypted data storage market as well, or have you literally just walked away from all of it?
So we still have our backup product. You can still sign up for it. And over the coming some amount of time, I can't give you a precise quote, it'll all get kind of rolled in. So that way the one backup stuff is available in Crossclave, and you can use the total new modern architecture and run with it like that. Which also includes fully functioning apps on phones, which I know has been a long bugaboo for customers on one backup, one to upload from their phone. Wow. So eventually, when the backup product gets put out to pasture, it's because there's already an upgrade path giving everyone what they want and more.
Well, let's take a quick break, and we will come back and we will keep peppering you with questions. I've got a few up the encryption lane, where you see things going. Hopefully I'm not throwing you a curveball, but I want to ask your take on one of my favorite topics lately, which is homomorphic encryption. But don't answer yet. We'll take a break and be right back.
We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cybereason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cybereason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, the Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. You can measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your own score. How do you do this? Visit securityweekly.com/CIRB and take the survey. Also, our next webcast will be coming up on August 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and it is entitled How to Implement Cloud Security That Actually Works. That's interesting. It's lessons from the front lines. Visit securityweekly.com, click on webcast trainings to register. And of course, if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or trainings, you can find them at securityweekly.com/on-demand. I personally am glad that more and more organizations and people are realizing that just throwing stuff to the cloud and outsourcing to a third party does not necessarily meet your security demands and your security requirements. So tune into that episode to find out how to make sure you're doing the right things or how to make sure your provider are doing the right things. All right. Anyway, back to the discussion. SpiderOak. I teased you right before the break. I'm just curious to get your take, and this is sort of a sidebar, but I've been having discussions the last month or so with people because I met a company, it was actually through my day job, that is promoting this thing called homomorphic encryption, where you can extract, and this is my paraphrase, usable data from the data that you have without decrypting it, that somehow doesn't compromise the integrity of the underlying data that you're trying to protect, or I think perhaps doesn't reveal personally identifiable or privacy information. I don't personally get it. You're playing in the encryption space. I was wondering if you had any perspective on it to help educate me, set me straight.
Yeah, that's I think there's a lot of really interesting promise around homomorphic encryption. But at SpiderOak, we actually haven't done very much with it. And the reason why is coming back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Our own encryption for some of our customers needs to follow compliance rules. So for us, that's using FIPS certified ciphers and FIPS certified encryption modules when the customer wants that. And so that's, our innovations come from how we're applying cryptography using a distributed ledger, but not actually in how we're actually doing the cryptography. So we're watching the space and we're watching what compliance and regulatory bodies mention about the space, because there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with that. But right now, we haven't actually done very much with it.
But thank you for that explanation. But you're implying, I think what I'm hearing is that at a minimum, homomorphic encryption algorithms are not FIPS or IEEE or ISO or NIST certified and is that because they are somewhat lesser cryptographically because they do reveal underlying information, or is it simply they just haven't completed the process yet, or it's too new for NIST and all the other orgs to know how to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's mainly that it's just too new of a concept.
Okay.
I mean, cryptographers by and large tend to be relatively conservative about their art because coming back to what is cryptography?
That's an understatement, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, well, what's the point of cryptography? You're trying to make structured information look like random noise, but there's no real statistically significant way of measuring if your random noise is random enough or not. So you look
outside
for
of a
algorithms.
Agency, I would agree with that. But continue.
And yes, I mean, cryptanalysis is the art of turning not fully random information into structured information again. And so there's a lot of slowness in cryptography to begin with, which is well warranted. There's a lot of academic and peer review going on in the open world, and there's been an explosion of research in cryptography over the last 20 years that's come up with some really good ciphers that actually I think are better than some of the FIPS certified ones, if you're counting at not the very least difficulty of implementation. But there's a limited set of ciphers that the government has specified. And there's a lot of regulatory bodies and agencies that have simply adopted what the government says is good as what they deem as good. So, SpiderOak, we're doing a lot of really interesting things in key management and with distributed ledgers to basically run key management. And there's already enough eyebrows arching that we don't want to introduce any more, just that might wind up with a pretty significant speed bump in adoption.
Well, since you brought it up, and given that I am an aged cryptographer by profession,
mature.
Yeah, I'm aged. I'm not OG. I'm just O. At least I feel that way sometimes. You brought up key management, which all the way back to my upbringing as a cryptographer is the Achilles heel of most cryptographic systems, most algorithms. So could you talk very briefly about the mechanics of how you're doing crypto, particularly for your newer Endeavor Crossclave and your collaboration tool?
Yeah, so we use a distributed ledger where we put events in over time, and that's governed by a strong policy engine that you can actually program for whatever your rule set is, your security policy. It's driven by an actual programming language we invented for this. And instead of a certificate authority, which is basically an element of here, trust us, here's your key. Instead of a directory server, which is the same thing, we rely on the endpoints using distributed ledger to come to agreement on the way a security system is supposed to look. And in our system, all identities are actually public keys. So when you get this endpoints in agreement on the way the security system looks and identities being public keys, it becomes really easy for us then to essentially just do some Diffie-Hellman and come up with keys for a particular compartment, or say like a channel in chat has its own unique keys known only to the endpoints participating within that particular channel.
Now, because you're doing collaboration stuff, I'm assuming that means at some level it's real time, near real time. So are you doing similar things to like HTTPS, where you're sort of establishing the handshake with public key cryptography, but ultimately you're exchanging a symmetric key so that people can actually enjoy their experience?
Yeah, exactly. And so our identities are actually public-private key pairs, and every device that you have on your account has its own public-private key pair. And those asymmetric keys, the public-private keys, are used to negotiate in each channel a symmetric key, an AES key, for the content that's being communicated in that space. So that way, to your point, we don't wind up giving everyone major sad face as you watch your computer just churn through ECC all the time.
Right.
But I mean, that provides you with issues in terms of, and a lot of companies have overcome this. There's Signal, 3-mode wire, et cetera, all of the ephemeral messaging sort of platforms. And so let me ask the hard question, and this is sort of a double or triple question. Why do I care about SpiderOak, and how does this help me with my federal business?
Great questions. So let's talk about Signal. Signal is a great tool for what it is. If you want that ephemeral messaging, if you want that secure calling and not dive too deep into it, it's great. It is really nicely secure. But there's a couple different things here. So first, our system allows keeping track of these symmetric keys for communications. So with a typical encrypted messenger, say you add somebody to a group, and now you need to catch them up on everything.
Right.
Whereas with our system, you add somebody into a group, and they can see the chat history just like a normal, non-fully encrypted chat tool like, say, Slack. So you don't need to reshare all the files and resend all the messages to get somebody up to speed on what's going on, which is great within an organization, as opposed to Slack, and that's like Signal, which is really, it's in its old name, text secure. It's there to replace SMS and there to replace your phone with really great security. So that's why you would choose us over, say, Signal, is that more group-focused collaborative effort on this. Now, how does this help with you federally? Now, those of us who are aware of the federal space are aware of CMMC and the continual, when's it coming? Is it coming? Is it still going to be a thing? It's been forever delayed, and our contracts still include simply 800-171 compliance. But how can we help with that? So first off, even ITARs, which is a huge headache in and of itself, there's a small clause in the ITARs regs that say, oh, well, game on if you're end-to-end encrypted. I'm paraphrasing a small paragraph in a gigantic set of statutes.
No, understood.
But, and I'll collect my $20 if a lawmaker successfully gets the words "game on" into something. But that's ITARs is essentially boiled down to that: game on if you're end-to-end encrypted. And in terms of auditing and data access, where 800-171 compliant, with if CMMC actually becomes a thing, we're definitely going to be going through that ourselves. But we don't actually put plain text of your sensitive data, of your controlled and classified information, of your for official use only information, of your PII, of your EPHI. We don't put that on our cloud in plain text ever. We don't provide access to that in plain text unless you specifically give us the cryptographic capability to do so. For example, in the SpiderOak share room system. First off, we don't, from a security standpoint, and could be argued on a compliance standpoint, we're not ever actually holding plain text of your sensitive information. Additionally, when you use blockchain as your native data format, that's also your native auditing format.
Whoa,
this isn't something that's...
Whoa.
Back up
you said you could say, you said you could throw blockchain into the discussion. Party foul.
So
I've got a question for you. You cannot be using blockchain as your native data format for storing all of the conversation, storing all of the blobs.
Why not?
Or can you?
Because the space and transaction limitations.
Okay, so first off, our CTO is a Time Lord. So space and time, wibbly wobbly, whatever. So we built our own custom distributed ledger. And that's why, I've been saying distributed ledger this whole show, and nobody said anything. But I said blockchain, and now everyone freaks out.
No. You said it as your native data form. That's when it hit me. Like, you're actually meaning you're using it to store the encrypted blobs?
Yeah.
No. Have you added the blobs? You've added all the blobs to your chain.
Well, and that's the thing. So for us, every channel, every communication space is its own set of ledgers. So first off, there's no one big gigantic ledger that you need to spend 30 years and 20 terabytes downloading. It's not like Bitcoin where there's a one chain to rule them all. I know that's oversimplified, and there's a ton of extra side chains and things going on with Bitcoin. Please don't spam me. But we have a separate chain per channel. So first off...
So you're saying that it slows down as our conversations get longer?
No. Now, you have to keep the whole state. but it's a append-only thing. So you just need to make sure that it matches up with the previous head of the block. So as our conversation keeps going,
proof of stake, or what is your chain running on? What is your consensus mechanism on your chain?
Really? So we have a private blockchain, private permission blockchain. So why do you have a consensus algorithm? It's because you don't trust the infrastructure to not censor you out of the economy. The economy, in this case, is traditionally a token-based system. We don't have that. In fact, censoring individual endpoints out of the system is a positive for us, because you may want to say, like, okay, well, Billy lost his phone. We're going to make sure that phone can't connect anymore. So we use transaction blocks as a way to both have a irrefutable history as well as to increase transaction speed. Because we could just have a hash chain of individual transactions, but then we need to make sure that the commits against actual storage happen before we say this is ground truth. Because when you do have a blockchain, you do need the chain to not change out from underneath you. Otherwise, the system breaks. So we need to make sure that...
Wait. So I respect that you have a private permissioned blockchain. That's fine. I'm not a zealot about decentralized. I'm not. But if you are not distributing it so that you have a consensus between the distributed points, it's not a distributed ledger technology. It is a ledger technology. And for whatever reason, you picked the most awkward ledger technology known to mankind. Up to you.
So it is distributed to the endpoints. Each endpoint has its own copy, so that way the endpoints can come to agreement independently of the server of what truth is.
That's a consensus mechanism. What's your consensus mechanism?
They all have to line up and match the policy engine. Like, there's a set of policy rules governing every transaction, and from there, the policy engine itself is distributed on a ledger itself as well. And so if the endpoints don't come to agreement, they can't communicate. And so, we're trying to negotiate. Mm-hmm.
You kick an endpoint out if it falls out of sync, if it can't negotiate, if it becomes corrupt or whatever. And that's as a security mechanism, and I totally respect that. That's appropriate. I think that we're speaking similar languages, but different dialects of it. I suspect that as a private permission blockchain, you are using some sort of proof of stake and centralized consensus mechanism, but I'd have to sit down and talk with you.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we could.
Are you running on
Hyperledger? Take up the rest of the call in here. No, it's our own system.
Okay, valid. That's interesting. I'd love to. That will be another call, and we will have you back for another one about that. Because I tell you right now, we're going to have a long discussion about blockchain and semi-distributed ledger technologies. Because if you control the system on the endpoints, it's not a distributed ledger, in my opinion. But we can talk.
Perhaps this is a topic for an educational webinar, because you're going to...
I'd love that. Yes, that would be lovely.
Not on my show. Are we going to spend a whole segment on
Another time.
But I wanted to get back to...
please, Matt, go.
I wanted to actually answer your question on how this helps with compliance, because when you have this distributed ledger, with the data in there, both the state of the security system as well as content tracked in this ledger, now you have a high fidelity, irrefutable, inductively proven correct audit log that you can then trace every write in the system. You can see who had access to exactly what, when, for how long, and what data is flowing through the system. So you can actually see Alice, Bob, and Carol go through all sorts of whatever through the system and play that back, and then feed that into whatever alerting system or analysis system you want, like Splunk. And so we have this extra high quality set of controls and auditing on top of what most people are used to.
Well, that's actually very interesting, because I always have to put a PCI spin on everything, because I pretty much, that's the only language I speak at this point. And when we're talking encryption and encrypted communications, I automatically sort of migrate to requirement 3.4, encrypting the data at rest, encrypting the data in transit. But what you're suggesting is more for everybody's edification, requirement 10, which is collecting all the logs, the event logs, the monitoring logs, sys logs, and so on and so forth, and and really for forensic purposes, so that you can figure out when something went wrong, how it went wrong, and who done it. And so it's actually an interesting application of cryptography, is to validate the evidence that you've collected. That's actually very interesting, because and an application of cryptography that you don't often hear people talking about. So I'll give you a thumbs up for that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one thing just to secure your communications. It's another thing to actually be able to audit that. I mean, I'm familiar with the PCI and financial requirements for auditing that can go make, if any of us on this call had hair, it would be on fire or torn out.
Fair enough.
Any of us on this call had hair. Thank you so much. You're so right. And I mean, in terms of data at rest, I'm going to say something else that's probably going to get somebody saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. But in a general case, there's caveats a mile long here, but in a general case, there's really no encrypted at rest conventional systems. Your disk is encrypted, right? Which really only helps if the machine is off or the disk gets removed or whatever, power is lost to the drive, right? What happens when the machine is on and actively serving data? Is that data really encrypted anymore when it's mounted as a plain text mount point on the system?
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the case with every encryption system.
Well, not every. I mean, there are applications of encryption within like database systems where, in theory, only fields are being encrypted.
But anything
the overarching argument that's being made here is it's great to encrypt the data, and similar to key management, it's how do you control and protect and prohibit access to the keys which give you access to the data, and it's sort of a shift because now it's more trust relationships, it's access control measures, and in the instance of disk encryption, it's sort of transparent. You log on and everything, like you're saying, Matt, is sort of magically decrypted. But you can have similar instances within databases if you're logging on as a DBA. Or you're a user with certain privileges, and you're supposed to be looking up data in fields, and your user ID, your database ID is built into the permissions that sort of decrypt transparently to you. So you're just looking at a database and the field's already been decrypted. So it's a great point because there is a lot of. And I was actually going to ask for your comment because early on, and we sort of got away from it. But it seems in the last year or two that encryption again is becoming the holy grail or the silver bullet that solves everybody's problems. I see it in the PCI world specifically because if you encrypt from the point of entry of your credit card, whether you're tapping it or dipping it or swiping it, you as a merchant, most of your responsibilities goes away because you don't have the ability to see the card data because in theory the encryption's happening in a place that you can't get to. You don't have access to the keys, which is a subtle detail that's lost on a lot of organizations. Not only do you not have direct access to it, but it's buried in firmware. It's protected from physical and logical compromise. And that's a little bit more than simply, well, I don't have the function to decrypt, so therefore I can't see the data. But in as much as it seems like encryption is becoming, like I said, sort of the promised land of if we just encrypt everything, all of our security worries go away. There's this guy, what's his name, Bruce somebody Schneier, that wrote a book back in I want to say the early 90s, Applied Cryptography, where he basically made the statement, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't know what's the big deal about security, just encrypt everything and the problems go away. To which he later rescinded and said, okay, I was young and naive. That was a little bit oversimplistic, which I appreciate that he acknowledged that. But it seems like we're drifting back into let's just encrypt everything and all of the problems goes away. Thoughts, comments, words of wisdom or advice along that vein?
Yeah, I mean, encryption's a tool in a toolbox. I think it is underutilized, and so I do support a lot of people using encryption in more places. Using, for example, the secure element on Apple devices is great. Let's keep the keys away from the operating system. Excellent ideas. But it's a tool in a toolbox, and security and actually compliance all come down to how you're operating. They're operational concerns, right? Mm-hmm. From, as a cloud provider, we don't care really how you're paying for our service. We want to know that there's some money coming to us that's attached to you in exchange for using our service. That's all we care about. And we use encryption to take care of that. But at the end of the day, there's going to be people that need access to data. And your organization needs to make sure that the people that have access to data are accessing it appropriately, and that they have rights to do so, that they're not going to go take an extended vacation overseas with that data. And those are all, encryption can solve a ton of problems. They can make ability to know and need to know just a circle. But you still have a ton of issues to solve on top of that encryption's never going to solve around trust, actual human-to-human trust. It's never going to solve fully what happens on the endpoint. Ultimately, no matter how much encryption, I still need to have English text up on my screen for me to read and consume, and then I need to type that back. You can use encryption to solve a lot of that, but ultimately there's huge broad scopes of things that encryption isn't going to solve. It's just a tool in the toolbox. And SpiderOak's mission is to make it as easy as possible to leverage a lot of those tools. But we're not a hammer, and not every problem is a nail. And I think that's a great way to describe broadly in general what encryption is. It's a tool. So,
well, I appreciate your candor and. I mean, effectively, every security solution out there is really a tool. I don't believe there is such a thing as a solution. Everything is a tool, and properly wielded helps you accomplish a task. And few two companies even understand the task at hand. They're just conditioned to, it says I should have a hammer. It says I should have a screwdriver. It says the hammer should be a ball peen hammer. So I have the best ball peen hammer on the market.
But if you don't know what to hit with it, you got a problem.
Well, exactly. It's the implementation, and we've alluded to that. Key management is part of implementation, and it's really what problem are you trying to solve, and what tools can you wield to do that, and minimize the risk of breach or compromise or data loss or whatever it is that you're trying to protect. Which again, few two companies even understand and internalize what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Any other, items or details you want to bring out, Matt? Anything we haven't touched on that you were really wishing we would have asked, and you've got something to say?
Let's talk about zero trust.
Oh gosh, let's do that. Wait, I got to get my buzzword bingo card out.
Stop.
I've got.
We can talk about zero trust, and I think that's a great topic. I'd almost like to have another show just on zero trust. I think that zero trust.
We can tease about it a little bit.
We've got let's tease about it. I mean, encryption is a way of helping with zero trust, because if my cloud providers, and we talked about this earlier, if my cloud providers can't tell what I've put up in the cloud storage or am processing in the cloud compute, then they can't steal any of it. They can't copy any of it. They can't do anything with it. That's one aspect of zero trust. But in this day and age of massive amounts of partners, affiliates, third parties, your third party risk meter is pinging off the chart for most companies. Is there zero trust in what SpiderOak does for third party risk as well?
Yeah,
not just cloud service providers.
That's exactly what I wanted to start talking about. With third-party cloud providers, you can't actually iterate and create a fixed list of who you're trusting. Like, think about that. If I'm some SaaS provider on AWS, you're now thinking about me, like my engineers. You're thinking about my customer support people. You're thinking about my vendors. You're thinking about the people in my software supply chain. And now you're thinking about AWS, who they let into their data centers. And they have AWS, I don't want to say like they're slacking here, but there's certainly a lot of people there. They have a huge supply chain. They have a huge software supply chain. It winds up being, you just can't enumerate everyone that is being trusted. And if you want to talk about zero trust, what the words actually mean, because I know this is technology, at the intersection of technology and business, words lose meaning, and up is down, left is right. But if we're talking about zero trust, starting from actually not trusting anyone, I just said that cryptography is a tool in a toolbox here, but in this case, I think it is one of the linchpin technologies. If you actually want to start with a third party, not trusting them at all, because that's the cloud. That's third-party computing these days. It's somebody else's computer that you're renting time on. And so cryptography is the enabling technology for real zero trust, as opposed to what if we took our normal corporate IT perimeter and just replicated it a bunch, but at like 5% of the original size per service.
Oh God!
If you're doing
Kill
that
me now.
like if you're putting this on somebody else's infrastructure anyway, you're increasing the barriers for attack against your own stuff, but you're not addressing that third-party risk at all.
Right. So now's the time of the show where I interrupt and ask you, and this is partially for my personal edification, but for the purposes of conversation, and I'm not holding you to right or wrong, but can you give us just a brief working definition of what you mean by zero trust?
I mean, in this case, actually reducing the trust inherent in a system to only the people that need to know.
Okay.
That's defined by.
That's not.
Defined by your role-based access control, defined by, the roll of the dice.
Defined by the actual business needs and the security plan, the operational security plan around that information. So in a medical setting, you might talk about your healthcare provider, you might talk about the billing people and the insurance people and yourself, and that's it. And each of those people have their own different roles. You mentioned role-based access, but really the need to know starts from business requirements, whether it's government or private sector. There's actual business requirements around who needs to know what information, and how can we embody those rules into a data system.
So
that makes sense.
I'm typing it into the Discord, but I'll say it out loud. Not really knowing what people mean by zero trust most of the time it's mentioned, what I've been able to glean from conversations, that it has something to do with ultimately data protection, that it's focused on the data. So I find it interesting that in your definition, you allude to the trust associated with systems, but presumably it's systems that are transmitting, processing, storing the data, which we ultimately care about.
Yeah, because all the flip side to zero trust is a traditional network architecture where you just kind of trust everything. You trust your switch, you trust your providers, you trust everything that's within the corporate perimeter.
Well, it's not that you trust it; you just don't know how to configure it to make it work in any way other than everything's open. But that's the industry we grew up in: plug and play, make it work, because people want to be able to use all the tools in the tech. I find it interesting too that zero trust, the more we drill down and the more people I ask to define it, it's not really a new concept. It's maybe a buzz, dare I say a buzzword, but it's really, sort of
it's not a new concept, but it's a new ability. Yeah, it's a new ability to actually enact or embody least privilege ability at its highest level.
Or possibility. I mean, is there something uniquely new in terms of the ability to invoke things like access control, role-based access control? I mean, trust is something we've talked about for, at least for me, for 30 years in this context. The fact that we're actually maybe able to do it now, maybe that is what you mean by it's new.
Yeah, and I think the combination of that plus, this is, buzzword bingo. Zero trust is taken off to, we have a corporate perimeter that we're now shrinking down around each service. That means you now need extra infrastructure to do all that, right? Like there's a lot of ways to talk about zero trust, but it really comes down to the actual humans and the processing of data that humans have computers do on their behalf. I mean, maybe within the Google campus, there's computers doing things entirely for the benefit of other computers. But ultimately, everything that we do as security practitioners is making sure that the humans that actually need information to do their jobs get it, that data is limited in scope to just those individuals, and that data integrity is there as well. And finally, not get in the way of doing their jobs, because obviously, somebody's going to, if we get in the way of doing somebody's job, they're going to figure out another way to do their job. And it's not going to be secure or compliant.
Right. Interesting. I certainly appreciate your willingness for us to sort of philosophize about all this. Interrogate, yes, that's fair.
A little bit of interrogation.
But philosophize a little bit more than just simply what do you do and don't do and how do you do it and it's good or bad or indifferent, which is how these talks typically go. We definitely would love to have you back, and we could continue to philosophize about some of these concepts.
Sure.
Yes, we would. We want to do a webinar with you. Like, I'm like, ooh, can we bring him back? I want to talk. Honestly,
I'm right here.
We're getting some great questions about zero trust, people missing the TrueCrypt platform, for plausible deniability, and some very nice systems in terms of encryption. We're getting some great questions about what the difference of PAM and zero trust is, which, it's understandable, but it's a great question to discuss and explain. We're also, we'd love to talk on a slightly more long-term basis, like a webinar style thing, about doing potentially or talking about the distributed ledger and how that works on an operational level in terms of keeping it up to speed, not making it too much of a drag on the system transactionally and size and et cetera. There's a lot of things we can talk about. So yeah, we'd love to have you back. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean
to be back.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us today, and thank you and SpiderOak for being a sponsor of our show. That's ultimately what keeps us going, despite our engaging and fascinating and thought-provoking conversations that we have, which is why I'm here. For our listening audience, if you want to learn more about SpiderOak and specifically what they're doing in the areas of their product, it's called Crossclave, I believe.
Crossclave.
Did I get it right? Yep. You can go to securityweekly.com/SpiderOak, and that will start you down the road to learning more about them. That's going to wrap us for this week. We'll be back next week, and we will be talking to Naomi Buckwalter. She's a virtual CISO, Director of Information Security at an undisclosed company, and also founder of a nonprofit called the Cybersecurity Gatebreakers Foundation. We're going to talk about breaking into cybersecurity, breaking down the barriers of entry into cybersecurity for people that are outside of this field. So it looks to be a good conversation, hopefully thought-provoking conversation. So please join us next week. That's going to wrap for us for Security and Compliance Weekly. Keep building those bridges and tearing down the silos. We'll talk to you next week.